Good morning. Welcome to today's SharePoint Week webinar. My name is Ella and I'm delighted to be joined by Michel Mendes, who will be talking to you today about extending SharePoint with the Power Platform. Remember to join the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC22. Remember to check out the Resource Centre. The Resource Centre is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. And join us later today for our second webinar and the final webinar of SharePoint Week, Making the Most of SharePoint and Microsoft Teams with Susan Hanley, taking place at 3 p.m. CEST. And don't forget, our super early bird sale ends tomorrow. This is your last chance to save and secure your tickets at the best possible price. And only yesterday, we launched the program for ESPC 22. This program has over 100 sessions, 4 Microsoft keynotes, and 9 tutorials. The program covers a variety of topics, including SharePoint, Microsoft 365, Microsoft Teams, OneDrive, PowerShell, and loads more. So be sure to check it out at sharepointeurope.com/conference/schedule. After the webinar, we will have a question and answer session. Type any questions you may have into the question window. Questions will be selected and asked at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar host this morning, Michel. How are you doing this morning?
Oh, good.
Perfect. I see your SharePoint screen.
Oh, perfect. So I was just checking that. And how are you keeping, Ella?
Yeah, great. Looking forward to this.
Right. It's great to be here today.
Thanks very much for joining us. I'll leave you go now.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, everyone. So today we are going to talk about how can we extend SharePoint by using the Power Platform. Before we begin, I just wanted to tell a little bit about myself. So currently, I am working as a senior consultant in Avanade. I am a Microsoft MVP in Office Apps and Services. I work in the IT field since 2008, and I started my career as a developer. So I graduated in computer science, started my career as a .NET developer. Then I migrated to SharePoint as a developer and later became a consultant/developer. And currently I am working with O365 and 365 and the Power Platform. More focused on customizing SharePoint, but a little bit on Dataverse as well. And I am originally from Brazil, and since 2008, I moved to Dublin and I've been living here. If you want to get in touch after the presentation, you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter in those two handles and addresses here for the social network. Quick overview of the agenda for today. First, we are going to talk about how a quick oversight of how can we extend SharePoint with the Power Platform. Then we are going to explore a little bit more of the possibilities on how can you customize SharePoint, how can you do some customizations using Power BI and Power Virtual Agents. And after that, we are going to deep dive into some tips on Power Automate on how you can extend SharePoint and also in Power Apps, Canvas apps. And at the end of everything, we are going to have a quick demo on how everything connects together. And I'm going to leave some useful resources for you as well. So why would we customize SharePoint with the Power Platform? To begin with, this is a platform that has some licenses that are already included in most of the Microsoft 365 licenses. So basically, let's say if you have O365 E5 or E3 licenses, you would have the rights to use Power Platform to customize SharePoint or even to build some custom apps or custom workflows connecting to any O365 data sources. And by doing that, you are using the Microsoft Cloud, which already has an infrastructure provided for you. You won't need to be either creating your separate cloud infrastructure or creating your separate custom apps and maintain them, because the background of it's already maintained by Microsoft. You can build quick customizations. and easily integrate with other Microsoft 365 apps. And also, at first, you won't need to have any pro development skills. So you can simply do some configuration and make your custom apps work, or even use a few formulas in the case of Canvas apps, which we call the low code tool. And the other thing that's important to highlight as well is that previously for SharePoint on premises and SharePoint Online, if you wanted to do low code customizations, let's say create custom forms or custom workflows, you would need to use InfoPath or SharePoint Designer to build your custom workflows. And we know already that InfoPath has an end date declared, which if I'm not wrong is 2026. So after that, it's not going to be supported anymore. And for new tenants, I believe it's even not enabled. And SharePoint Designer workflows as well. We know that SharePoint Designer workflows, they have two engines. One of them is already discontinued, which is the 2010 engine. And I believe that the 2013 engine is going to be discontinued soon. There's no announcement on that, but that's what we believe, because Microsoft is continuously investing in the Power Platform and pushing it to be the replacement for that. Also, the good thing as well about the Power Platform is that if you want to get started, you can find several samples for free in the community, some blog posts, some videos, even some apps to download and install in your environments. And as I said, because there's continuous investments from Microsoft, we know that's the path to go if you want to build local customizations for SharePoint. So a quick oversight of what is the Power Platform. What are the main pillars for the platform? For applications development, we have Power Apps to build our custom apps. In the case of SharePoint, we would be focused only in Canvas apps because that's what can natively connect to SharePoint. We have Power Automate to create our custom workflows and automate processes. We have Power BI to build our reports and having some analytics capability. We have Power Virtual Agents, where we can build our intelligent chatbots. And combining with SharePoint, as I said, related to Power Apps, what we can build to extend SharePoint is standalone Canvas apps and custom lists or library forms. What I mean by standalone Canvas app is a full Canvas app built outside of SharePoint and connecting to SharePoint lists or libraries as a data source. And custom lists and library forms, it's a special type of app where we can customize only the form and don't have to be rebuilding the whole screen from scratch, and we can simply reuse the list view capabilities. Simply for Power Automate, we can build cloud flows as we would build any type of workflow in SharePoint Designer, but on top of SharePoint data. But obviously with more advantages as connecting to other data sources that are not SharePoint and some advanced features. For Power BI, we can build reports and dashboards on top of lists or libraries data. And for Power Virtual Agents, natively, we won't be able to connect to SharePoint, but Power Virtual Agents can connect to Power Automate, and we can then call a Power Automate flow that connects to SharePoint. And it's important to highlight as well that if you are willing to use only Power Automate for Teams, we can use the Dataverse for Teams licensing and create bots focused only on Microsoft Teams that then can be included in your Microsoft 365 license. Now that I explained a little bit about what are each tool, I think it's good to highlight how they can connect together. So let's say in this case, if you have some lists or libraries in your SharePoint site, you could begin getting a list and creating a custom form and a full custom app to that list. So if you want to have, for example, simply a customized form with some more organized content in tabs or any custom behavior in the list, for the people who manage the data to access, you create a custom form, and then you can enable the same content to other users by creating a separate tab so that people can search for information in that list in a customized way. And the same Canvas app, if you package it as a Teams app, you can then deploy it to Microsoft Teams and reuse it as a Microsoft Teams tab or a Microsoft Teams personal app. And let's say if you wanted to add approvals to the list, you can then create a Power Automate flow using the approvals connector that sends approval requests to Microsoft Teams. And based on the approval requests outputs, you can then update the list items back. And then you control your approval processes from Power Automate and Teams. And not only this, if you want to create, for example, a chatbot that can register data in the list or read data from the lists, you can then use Power Virtual Agents connecting to a Power Automate flow and manipulating that data. And at the end of everything, you could then build a Power BI dashboard, reading information from those lists and processing anything, or creating some calculations, enabling you to have better insights about your data. And as I said, we are gonna explore a little bit about each tool before diving into the demo. First of them I would like to go through is Power BI. So for Power BI, what are the common scenarios that we have to customize SharePoint or extend SharePoint? The first one will be to create a report from a list or a library, which is actually a brand new scenario that was introduced, I think, last year. So what you can do with this is from the integrate menu, you can simply select Power BI and visualize the list, and then it creates a dashboard for you automatically, and you can keep changing it. It's pretty easy to use. However, it's limited to only the list you are creating that dashboard, and there's more limitations on it. You can't connect to other data sources, you can't use DAX on it. But if you want to create a more powerful, a more robust report, you can then create a Power BI report from Power BI desktop and connect to multiple lists or libraries, or even cross data with different data sources. And after you publish that Power BI report to the Power BI service in Office 365, you can enable a feature that you grab a report address, and then you can embed that report address in SharePoint pages. It's important to have in mind that if you want to publish a report and share it with more people, you would need to have at least 25 license or a standalone Power BI Pro license to be able to share dashboards. You have to have that for the person who is sharing the dashboard and for the person who is also consuming the dashboard, because otherwise you would get access denied to it, and you get a message saying that you don't have the license to use it. And in the context of SharePoint, one thing that's not supported that's important to have in mind is direct query. What does it mean? That direct query is a Power BI connection mode where you connect to the data source in real time. When you connect to the data source in real time, you get the latest information straight ahead. But that doesn't work with SharePoint. You have to use import mode, which is basically do a data refresh. It creates a copy of the data into your data set, and then you can schedule it for a few times a day with a max of 8 times per day if you have the Power BI Pro license. So keep in mind, if you are using Power BI, you have to schedule the data refreshes, and they are a little bit limited, but it's in a reasonable amount of refreshes anyway. Power Virtual Agents. So how can we customize or extend SharePoint with Power Virtual Agents? The scenarios here are pretty simple, as I said before. So simply, you cannot connect to SharePoint from Power Virtual Agents, but you can call flows from Power Virtual Agents actions, and those flows can interact with SharePoint. So what happens is you can pass parameters to the flows. So in this demonstration here, I wanted to create a SharePoint site. So I'm saying what's the site type, what's the other params, the site name, URL, blah, blah, blah. My flow creates a site, returns the response back, and then the bot gives me the site address and tells me that it was created properly. And as I said as well, it's included in Dataverse for Teams. So if you want to start using it, it's free within the Microsoft 365 license with a few limitations. And the main ones, as I mentioned, when we talk about customizing SharePoint, what we see people using the most are Power Automate and Power Apps. And when we talk about Power Automate, what are the main scenarios? One scenario that sometimes the users don't know that it's possible is, instead of calling a manual flow directly from the Automate menu, we can create custom buttons using list formatting and call them from the list views or from the list columns. So basically, we pick up a flow, configure a custom formatting to a list column, and then it enables a button where we can trigger an approval process or any other type of flow. The other type of flow that's important to highlight in the context of SharePoint, especially if you came from a SharePoint on-prem background, are the recurring flows, because they can work as what we called previously a timer job. So you schedule a flow to be running every day and do some actions. For example, you can configure due date reminders. You can get a list of items that are pending for action or any criteria that you establish by your filter. And in the case that you wanted to create a flow for due date reminders, you can even start with this option out of the box, where you use the Automate menu and then you click Set a Reminder, select the field. On the background, it generates for you a Power Automate flow that you can then customize according to your needs and tweak it, or use it as a starting point, let's say. The other main scenario that we see for Power Automate flows related to SharePoint are to manipulate approval processes that then can be done using the approvals out of the box connector or adaptive cards, which would be a more custom way of doing things, but the same way. We could send adaptive cards for teams, and then after we get a response from the adaptive card, we can process the response and continue our flow according to what the user or the approver responded. And also, it's important to highlight that if you want to get started, if you never played around with it, there's the Power Automate templates gallery, where there are a lot of samples related to SharePoint. And you can simply create a flow from a sample and start changing it, start tweaking it, or even use those flows to start learning, which I think it's a good way to learn, because you have a lot of complex samples or useful samples where you can think about different scenarios. Let's say if you have a flow that gets a response from Microsoft Forms and saves it into SharePoint, maybe you want the same for another tool and simply change the trigger of it, and then you can keep going. But when you want to connect to any other O365 source, and sometimes you don't have an out-of-the-box action available, or even you have an out-of-the-box action available, but it doesn't meet your needs, it's worth having a look as well at Microsoft Graph, because by using Microsoft Graph, you expand the possibilities of what you can do in terms of connecting to other O365 tools, creating things, updating things, or reading data from other O365 tools, as let's say Exchange, Teams, or Groups. And then you can expand the possibilities of what you can do with Power Automate. So two examples that I find quite useful that we can do with Microsoft Graph are, one is create an O365 group, because you cannot do it out of the box, but using Microsoft Graph, you can create a planner plan as well, can be done by using Microsoft Graph. And if you don't have a premium license, you can use the new preview action below O365 group, which is called send an HTTP request. And that action is available basically to call Microsoft Graph only. But if you have the premium license and you want to extend what the preview action does, you can also do it using the HTTP action or HTTP to Azure AD. It's a more complex way to do things, but it's worth having in mind that that is available as well. And in the same case that we would have for Graph, if you wanted to connect only to SharePoint and do actions on top of SharePoint only, that those actions are not available out of the box, have in mind as well that we can use the SharePoint REST API, which is an endpoint that previously in SharePoint on premises or custom SharePoint apps with SPFX, people used to do any sort of calls to SharePoint and manipulate SharePoint data. So it is available to be used using the send and HTTP request to SharePoint action below SharePoint. It might be a little bit scary, but as usual, we can find a lot of samples around to help us, and it will extend a lot what we can do in Power Automate. So sample actions that we cannot do out of the box and we can do with HTTP requests to the REST API are create SharePoint sites, create lists, or even retrieve the item version history for a list item and do some logic on top of it after that. Unfortunately, we cannot do the same for Canvas apps, but the same way as we do in Power Virtual Agents, we can then call a flow that then uses the REST API, does the processing for us, and responds us with any output that we can use to do actions inside of the app. So at the end, you can use the REST API from Power Apps, Canvas apps as well by combining Power Automate. And one thing that's cool as well about the REST API is that there are some actions that they are not available out of the box from the SharePoint UI. So let's say you wanted to hide a list from the site contents. From the site contents menu, you would need to use PowerShell to hide that list, or even another tool like C# connecting to the SharePoint CSOM to then hide the list from the site contents menu. But by creating a button flow that calls the SharePoint REST API, we can then pass some parameters to the flow and make it as a mini script. And that's useful, especially in cases that, for example, the company doesn't allow you to install PowerShell in your machine, and you wanted to do some actions that specifically are only available from APIs. You can then create a button flow that does it. So in this case here, in this animation, we are simply running a flow and hiding a list from the site contents. And it can be a little bit scary when we talk about Graph API and SharePoint REST APIs. Obviously, for non-developers, I get that it could be, but there's a way that we can make it become a little bit easier. If we can get some samples around, make our connections work, we can then parse the response back using the parse JSON action so that it can be later manipulated in the dynamic content pane. And the easiest way to do it is you can create like a test flow first. So you see how the response is sent back to you by Graph or the REST API. Then you copy the content from the response, and you can then generate a sample schema using the generate from sample button in the parse JSON action. That speeds up the process, so you already get everything, all the properties defined, and you can then use them later in your other actions in the flow. The other way you can reference the responses are to access them directly in the expression pane, but to me, that sounds trickier. I prefer to use parse JSON, obviously, even though you are gonna spend one more action to do it in the flow, but it's cleaner, it's a neater way of having your flows built. If you still find trickier to use it, let's say if you wanted to do some action where you don't know how to do the request to the REST API in SharePoint, do some searching in community forums or any social media. You would find a lot of examples around, and they are quite useful. And the last item in the list is Power Apps Canvas apps that we can use to build our custom forms and applications. The first type of Canvas apps that we can build on top of SharePoint, as I mentioned earlier, is the standalone Canvas app, which is a full custom app outside of SharePoint connecting to SharePoint as a data source. The advantage of this is that it's quick to build. It will be quicker to build than traditional development in most of the cases, but it is ideal to target small business problems because it's quick to build, but it also has some disadvantages. So especially if you are adding a lot of controls to your app, or if you are adding a lot of data sources to your app, it can get slower with time, or it can get even slower to be edited. So what I recommend to do is, if you see that your scenario is growing a lot, if you're building a Canvas app on top of SharePoint, try to think on maybe splitting it in separate apps. So for example, you want an application where the main users would use to see content, and then you have another app that administrators would manipulate some data on the background. You can split it into apps instead of having one big app with separate screens for each profile. One disadvantage as well that's important to highlight, and some people don't know when they play around with Power Apps and then they find it as a pain point, is that the list connections cannot be dynamic. So what I mean by this is, when you are building a Canvas app connecting to SharePoint, you have to establish the connections at build time. You cannot change it using code. So for example, you have some list of lists where you want to retrieve content, and during the app execution, you change the list you are picking. If you haven't added them to the list of data sources. And this is something you can easily do with code, but with custom code as in SharePoint framework, but in Power Apps, you would not be able to do. And the other type that we can build, the other type of app that we can build to customize SharePoint are the custom forms, as I mentioned as well. The custom forms, the main advantage, and we would build custom forms on top of lists and libraries when we want to reuse the out-of-the-box functionality, and we want to only customize the form and don't have that much work, because then we can build a custom form quickly and reuse the rest of the functionality from SharePoint. The advantage as well is, like, users, sometimes they are already used to manipulate data from libraries or lists, and you want to create a fancy form so that they can organize the data better, like tabs or hiding or showing fields according to rules. And you can also reuse the capabilities of list formatting to highlight items or do some fancy stuff in combination with the form. Because otherwise, if you wanted to build a Canvas app, obviously you have to rebuild the whole interface from scratch. A quick win with the custom form as well is to build custom rules and behaviors, because depending on the type of rule that you want to implement, they can quickly be built, even with drag and drop or a few configuration tweaks on the screen, or you can even put some specific rules if you want to put more advanced rules, let's say to validate field values, text values. You can even use regular expression with the isMatch function, or even custom logic that you want to configure, putting some rules as you would do in custom code, but with a few lines. The main difference from the custom form to a standalone app is not only that you customize only the form, but it's also that's a special type of app that cannot be accessed outside of the SharePoint list or library. So you won't find that form. If you open your Canvas, your Power Apps app, you have the list of Canvas apps that you have access to. You won't find any custom form that you built for SharePoint there. Or if you open make.powerapps.com as well, they won't be listed there. The pain point as well is that if you want to export the custom forms to a different list or library, the process is a little bit tricky, because if you want to export it as you would do with a normal Canvas app, there's no easy way where you can import it and then change the references to the data sources or lists. First, you have to modify the package, unzip the file, change the site URLs and list IDs in the package to then deploy it to a different list. Let's say if you wanted to create if you have a test version of a list and you wanted to deploy it to a live version, that's when we would need to deploy a custom form as a package. Unfortunately, it's a little bit tricky, but we can have the help of this community tool that's available to modify the packages before deploying it to a separate site or list, or even to a different tenant with the same structure. It's important to highlight as well that obviously, if you have a very complex form, the best way to do it is to use the community tool and modify the exported package to then deploy it. But alternatively, maybe you tried it and it didn't work, like copying a form, a custom form from one list to the other by opening the Power Apps Studio in one list and try to paste it in the other. If you do it from the interface, like right click, select the options, copy paste, it doesn't work. But if you simply select the form and hit Control C and Control V in the destination, it will work perfectly. The other important difference to highlight when we talk about the custom forms comparing to the standalone apps are how the events work in the custom form. Because in a Canvas app, whenever you open a screen, you have the onVisible event being executed, and whenever the app starts, you have the app on start event being executed. And sometimes you want to kind of cache data or save it in collections or variables. And by doing this, in most of the cases, you will need to reset the variables or clear the variables so you have any custom behavior working correctly. But when you talk about the custom forms, have in mind that those events, they only run on the first time the form is open in a view. So let's say if you switch the view, the events run again, and switch the view and open an item, the events run again. Otherwise, they never are executed again. So if you have variables or collections that you need to reset, you have to do it in those integration events. And what are the integration events? Whenever you hit new to create a new list item and you show a custom Power Apps form, it's going to trigger the on new event. Whenever you hit open, either from here or from the main menu or from a list formatting button, you trigger the on view event. When you try to edit an item, you trigger the on edit. And when you save an item, you trigger on save, and so on for the cancel event. And that's where you should be clearing all your collections or variables from the custom form. Because otherwise, you can get wrong results or something's not going to work correctly in your form. What's delegation? It's an important point that we need to highlight for any type of Canvas app. It's not only for the custom form, but also for the full Canvas apps built on top of SharePoint. Delegation means that you send a query to a data source, and then the data source processes your query and returns it to you. If you send the query to a data source in a supported way, in this case, for example, we wanted to filter a SharePoint list, do a search on a SharePoint list for items starting with a certain title. If we use the filter function, it is delegable to SharePoint as a data source, and we are going to get the results back. However, if we use the search function is not delegable, and we don't get the results back, correct results back. Why? We could get the right results back, but we are doing a bet here, because what happens if a function is not delegable is that we get the first 2K items from the data source and do the search or processing locally. And then if our results are not among the first 2K items, we obviously won't get the right results. It's easy to know when our queries are not delegable, because if you write the queries in the formula bar, you will get a blue warning here, or if you didn't pay attention to it, they are going to be highlighted in your app whenever you use it with a warning sign. Some tricky bits to have in mind whenever you build some custom forms, separate forms, or full Canvas app as well, is that content types, they are supported, but there's no automatic detection when you want to show or hide fields according to the content type. So basically, you need to use the content type field and do some calculations to show or hide the fields, putting your custom logic on it for each of the content types in your list, if you want to use multiple content types with different fields. And also, there are some limited fields when customizing forms. The bigger problem to me is the managed metadata field, because you cannot see the items in a hierarchy. And whenever you do queries to the managed metadata service to search for a field, you only get 20 results back. So let's say you try to find an item, and your results, you would have 50 results on the managed metadata term set, but you only get 20 back. So that's a little bit tricky to handle. And also the location field and the image field, they are available, but you can't edit them from the app. There's also the URL field that, even though it works, it updates only the URL portion of the field. So you won't be able to change the description of the field. And the last bit here is, if you are creating custom forms in the list, you obviously would want to create custom rules in the form. And if you don't disable quick edit, let's say if you want to put some regular expressions to validate field values, if you don't disable the quick edit / grid view from the list, the users would be able to bypass your rules by simply clicking edit in grid view and then tweaking any data as they wish, bypassing your rules. It's important to highlight that even though we are trying to force the users to use our forms, but the customizations done using a custom form, they are not done in the server side. So if the users are smart enough, they could still use Power Automate to do it, but we are kind of making it harder for them anyway. And now that I have gone through all of those bits about the platform, I think it's nice to have a demo and show you how would everything work in terms of those types of customizations using the Power Platform. To begin with here, I wanted to show simply a basic list that has no customizations on top of it. So in this case here, I created a list based on the event itinerary template that's available out of the box in SharePoint. And in this template, it doesn't do anything special other than creating a basic list formatting field customization here. And you can see that the field, the form is the big form in the vertical format. There's nothing special in, it's not very friendly for users to use. But on the other side, I have here a SharePoint list customized with the list formatting for the main view and with Power Apps for the form. And you see in this list here, let me just zoom it out a little bit. In this list here, we have customized the form using a Canvas app, and by doing so, we can add some buttons on top of it to work as tabs. By clicking the buttons, we show or hide fields, and simply it makes the navigation easier for the users. And in terms of what we could achieve in terms of customizing the fields, some out of the box, some features that are not available out of the box that we could easily implement but put in Power Apps, like the regular expressions validation. If I put the format in the wrong format, I can detect that it's wrong and alert the user, or even put some customizations on the save button to prevent saving. So if I try to save it, I'm gonna get an alert saying that my main tab is invalid because I detected one of the items as the wrong format. So if I put only 2 letters and 3 numbers, it accepts. Another type of customization that we could do that's not possible out of the box is if you want to do some search in a lookup field, for example. In this case, we have a lookup field with multiple values with projected fields, where we have the session focus and also a related field named product. So let's say session focus will be Azure Functions and the product will be Azure. By doing this, we could, by customizing this dropdown with a custom query on the source list, we could then search by 2 different fields. So for example, if I wanted to find logic apps, I could find logic apps by typing logic apps, or I could type Azure to find logic apps, and it would be available among the choices. One other thing that we can do as well is we can add data from a separate list. So in this case here, we have another list created that's hidden from the main page. And then the users are forced to update the list only from the SharePoint form, from the parent list. So basically, we have created like a related table as we would have in InfoPath. We simply added a gallery to manipulate data here, save the contents of this table in a collection, and when we save the item, we save the related list as well. In terms of the attachments, so in this case, for example, I have added some customizations in the attachments field to prevent people from adding an attachment that's not a PDF file or a docx file. So if I try to attach something here, if I go to my desktop, let me just get a simple file. If I try to add an SVG file, it won't accept, and it will warn me that the only accepted formats are PDF and docx. For the approval field, in this case, I'm using a user that doesn't have permissions to approve. And those permissions, they are managed by a security group in Office 365. And that security group, it's a Microsoft 365 security group. We use the Microsoft 365 security group connector to detect if the current user is a member of the approvers group or not. And based on that, we enable or disable fields. And let's say if I'm not an approver, I want to request approval. I could then come to my main list, and there's here a custom button built with this formatting that then triggers a Power Automate flow that requests approval, and that approval is sent to a user with higher privileges. And talking about a user with higher privileges, if I open the same list back with a user with more privileges, as I said, I can simply, let me just refresh it here. Can simply come to the tab and edit the values if I wanted to, or I would get an approval request in Microsoft Teams. And if I submit my approval details to that list item, the details are going to be reflected back in the SharePoint list. So if I refresh the same item here, it should be approved. So the last one I opened here, securely connect to SharePoint. Actually, no, that was that one. It was approved with my latest comment. And as I explained before, like we can manipulate some data in SharePoint, create custom forms, custom workflows, and then on top of that also we could build a Power BI dashboard to show some statistics of what we have built on top of SharePoint. So we can then, by using the dashboard, drill down into data and have some insights. Let's say we have 10 sessions here, and on top of Microsoft 365, we have only 7. We have 2 in Azure and only 1 in the Power Platform. We can keep drilling down and refining our data as we wish. And one interesting thing as well that we can do, it's not only the statistics side of things, but you can do sort of your custom search by doing this and add links to the items in SharePoint, where you can simply click from the dashboard and open a form to visualize them. And let's say we have built the list, we have built a dashboard, people can manipulate the data, but what if we wanted to expose the same data in a full custom way to other users? We could then build a full custom app on top of the same data, but obviously it's a full custom app. We have to build it from scratch, and we had to build the same interface again so that the users would be able to access the data and see the forms and see whatever they wanted. In this situation here, it's just an app to find a session where we can click any item and see the details of the items with a totally different experience. The same application built with Canvas apps can be added to SharePoint as a web part. So you can add a Canvas app to SharePoint as a web part, either with a community web part, what's called the PNP enhanced web part, PNP enhanced Power Apps web part, which is available in the PNP repository, or the out-of-the-box one, which is available straight ahead from SharePoint. But if you want to use a more advanced scenario, let's say in the case of this PNP enhanced web part, it has extra features that you don't have in the out-of-the-box one. And the main one and the coolest one to me is that you can edit the web part, and you have some properties here to select what parts of the site's theme you want to send as parameter to the Canvas app. So basically you pick what colors, what theme definitions you want to send to the app, and you can then parse the colors in the Canvas app to change how your app looks and feels. So let's demonstrate. So for example, you have here the site using a theme which is more greenish. If you change the look of the site to have a red theme, the app is going to be refreshed automatically and change the theme according to the site. So that's something cool to have. Like, you can make your Canvas app look like more a native app for SharePoint if you want to add it to a page. In the same way, you can also export a package with that Canvas app and deploy it as a Microsoft Teams app. And when you deploy it to Teams, you also are able to detect what's the theme that the user are using, so that you can change the colors of your app and make it look like a native Teams app. So you see the same app built can be accessed externally, embedded in a SharePoint page, or deployed to Teams. It can be used as a personal app, which is this type of app here that you have the full page with the app, or you can add it as a tab to a chat or to a channel in Teams team. And now the last bit I wanted to demonstrate when we talk about the Power Platform tools is the Power Virtual Agent. This simple bot here has two topics implemented to manipulate SharePoint data. One we call a topic is a conversation where you can have with the bot. And you can then specify what are the trigger phrases. What do you say to the bot so you trigger that topic, and it keeps processing and talking to you. So this bot here has two, as I said, it has two topics implemented. First them is to create a custom site, and the second one is to add an event registration as well. So if I want to register a session, I can simply talk to the bot and say register. Oh, sorry, new session. Sometimes if you don't phrase it correctly, you won't get what you mean. So let's say if I added new session and instead of register session, it detected correctly. So I want to put session. It's going to prompt me for the session description. What's the location of the session? So I pick Dublin, and straight after that, it calls the Power Automate flow, adds the session to the list with a few details only, and gives me the link back to the session. So we can see the details we provided are added correctly here. The second conversation topic that it's implemented for this bot is to create a SharePoint site. This is not possible out of the box using the out-of-the-box actions of Power Automate, but by using REST API, we can do it. So let's say I want to create a SharePoint site. I simply call create a site. the bot's gonna prompt me for a few details. So let's say in this case, I can pick up team site or communication site only, but obviously more types of sites could be added, or more other complex questions could be added as well. I pick communication site, give a name to the site. Then the bot is gonna think a little bit and give me the link to the site created. If it failed, it would send me a message saying that the site creation was failed, but now it was successfully executed. I can then open my site and start from there customizing the site. So it adds the current user as an owner. So in terms of my demo, that's what I wanted to show, but there are a few last bits that I wanted to highlight before I go. Just some useful resources. Don't worry about saving those addresses, because I'm gonna let a copy of the presentation with Ella to be published later. But basically, just a link. I wanted to make available a link to get started with SharePoint REST API, because that's a main starting point if you want to get used to the send a HTTP request action in SharePoint. The link also to the Flow and Power Apps Migrator tool by the MVP Dennis Molodstov, which we use to export the packages and deploy the apps or forms to a different tenant or list. The web part sample as well that I showed, which is the Enhanced Power Apps web part. It was created by Hugo Bernier from Microsoft, and it's available in the PNP SP Dev FX web part repository. And also, if you want to get started with some more advanced samples, you can check the PNP Power Automate samples, and then you will find some examples from the community for free there. And that's me for today. Any questions?
Thanks for a great presentation. Someone just said there, will you share the links? And yes, you will. You will share the slide deck with me and they'll have the links in it. So you will definitely get them.
Yeah.
Someone else asked, do you use navigation screen functions on a common header for your buttons in the customized form?
No. The customized form, what I used to do is, we don't have, actually I can even show that quickly here. There is no navigation header. It's simply, just go back. It's simply a button setting a value in a variable where you can see what's the selected tab or not. So I have 4 different buttons, and in those buttons, instead of setting like a hard-coded name to the selected tab, I set the currently selected tab to be the button text. And based on that, I can then compare values in the form. So for example, if I select here, if I select that button, I set that the current tab text is a selected tab. And whenever I want to show fields or not on the visible property of the data card, I can then compare what's the selected tab with the button text. So you don't have to be worried about, different hard coding values to your buttons, because everything references the button text.
Great. And do you use formatted columns for the view and edit possibilities in the list?
Yes. I can share that as well if needed. Quick one as well. So it's simply called settings formats. It's just a quick simple button here where you can select the icon and create a simple button to call an action, which is edit props.
Someone asked, what kind of license does a user need to use a Canvas form in the SharePoint Online list?
You would need to have, if I'm not wrong, I think it's at least a E1 license. You have to have the Office 365 license, because then by having the Office 365 license, you get also what we call the seeded license for a Canvas app, and then you can use it in SharePoint. If you have only SharePoint Online license, you won't be able to use it. But if you have Office 365, it's included for usage in terms of customizing Office 365.
In terms of license, leveraging Power BI in Power Automate will require an additional license, ? Which is the best solution? I think in our perspective of using service account.
I think if you want to use a service account, the best way would be to have a Power Automate premium license for that service account, because obviously you don't need it to do connections and approvals in terms of SharePoint. But the problem is the number of actions that you can have executed per user. So if you have a premium Power Automate license, a per user plan, you would have a lot more actions per day available to be executed for that user. One thing to have in mind as well in terms of licensing is if you are using a service user to trigger the flows on the background, okay? But if you are manually triggering the flows, those executions count against the current user. So there's not much problem in terms of licensing, because you won't have a single user. It's very unlikely you would have a single user triggering 5K actions a day manually, you know.
Perfect. PNP Enhanced Web Part is free to display in Canvas app, ? Can we use PNP Enhanced Web Part for production?
You can use it for production, but obviously be aware that this is a community tool. Okay, so it's kind of Microsoft. It's a Microsoft, the biggest Microsoft community, the biggest Microsoft 365 community, but it won't be supported by Microsoft. You would have to support it yourself. But if you have some developers that can change that web part if needed, then it's okay. But just bear in mind that it's free to use, but it's not supported by Microsoft because it is an open source tool.
Perfect. I think that's all the questions, unless anyone has anyone. We've just about a minute or two to go, but I think that's them all covered. Looks like it. Yeah, I think that's it. So thanks a million for joining us today. A very good webinar. Thank you for spending time, and yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone. See you.
Have a good day.
Have a good day.
Bye.